If you don't find yourself watching live chess, classical chess that is, hours long, and then watching your favorite YouTubers recap the games, and then talking about it incessantly with your significant other, I already do that for you, and I'll summarize all the best takeaways right here. Today, we talk through strategies revolving around piece activity, king safety, and space. This first game's from round 2 of the candidates. Hikaru Nakamura of the United States, one of your favorite streamers, one of my favorite players. He has the white pieces. He opens with e4. My man, Vidit Gujrathi, he opens with e5. He's one of my new favorite players. Basically, all of his games in the candidates so far have been decisive. Some of them wins, some of them losses. Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with a draw here. And we have knight to f3, and we go into a Spanish game. This d3 move, all the commentators made all this like big deal about, oh, it's so committing. I won't bore you with all of those details. We continue forward with the game. This d6 move is threatening this pin right here. The bishop's not able to come back to prevent that pin, and so naturally Nakamura, he plays h3 to prevent that. And I want to pause here for just a second. Black right now has 1, 2, 3 pieces developed. White only has 1, 2 pieces developed. Having more pieces developed, that's an advantage. You have more options, more attacking options, more piece activity, and if you just simply count how many pieces you have out versus your opponent, you're going to be doing good. Nakamura, he strikes here in the center, and this really, really cool move in counter by Vidit, counter-striking that bishop. It gets the question mark, but it's still a really fun move. Preserves his bishop, and now it looks like Black just loses a pawn, and that's what happens in the game. I'm just going to give you a couple seconds to see if you could see this absurd move that Vidit's able to find. I'll give you just 3, 2, 1, and then if you're able to see the backup from it, bishop takes h3, just absolute absurdity. The idea behind it is really, really crazy. If you recapture right here, that's actually the best move. Black has this queen to b8 move, and the idea behind queen to b8 is that this knight is unable to move. If the knight, let's say, moves over here to, attack the bishop, well, oops, that's going to be a checkmate very, very quickly because this pawn is pinned by the bishop. Instead of that, the best move is to play this bishop move right here. We'll pile up in order to, yes, win that piece back, but white has this counterattack with his pawn, and now white's going to be fighting for the counterattack. None of that stuff happens because Hikaru is just a little bit too scared for that. I don't blame him. He doesn't know what kind of prep that Vidit has, and so instead of that, he moves his knight over right now. And so Vidit, naturally, he retreats his bishop back, attacks the queen. The queen slides over, and now Vidit is lining up his bishop over here on this diagonal. He has all of his pieces looking over at the king side. He has negative tensions, and what is the white pieces doing? Well, you know what they're not doing? They're not defending white's king, and so Hikaru is in big, big trouble right here. He pushes forward here, opening up the diagonal to potentially capture that pawn, and that's exactly what he does. And now he moves his bishop all the way backwards, and that's the wrong idea. He needs to be more active. Better right here is to move his queen forward, attack this, and there's this crazy, crazy line right here. Right here, you would think you'd want to play en passant because it's, a moral imperative, but in this case, obviously that's a terrible move for white. The idea instead is obviously give up your bishop. Again, these players are just insane. You're not going to be able to find something like this over the board necessarily. At least I'm not. You can't take with this or with this because you'll lose your bishop, so recaptures with the bishop. And no matter what you do after that, this bishop move pins the knight to the queen to re-win the piece. Just crazy, crazy stuff. But anyway, instead of all that, Nakamura, he moves his bishop all the way back, and the game continues. Vidit, he's striking over. He wants to dislodge this knight. Why does he want to do that? He's going to grab the center pawn and further get over to potentially attack that white king. Moves back, and boom, f5. He keeps pushing forward. That's potentially going to activate this rook as well. And Hikaru here, he tries to, okay, let me get your knight out of the center of the board. Let me get a little bit of breathing room. And right here, that pawn moves. It's a weakening move. King safety. When you're moving the pieces, the pawns particularly, in front of your king, that's going to be risky, especially when you don't really have that many pieces defending your king. And so Vidit takes advantage of this right away, slides his bishop right back. He gets the double exclam because why? Because he's giving up his knight. But if you take the knight right here, well, let's just pile up on that knight instead. This is the game of take my piece. Don't worry, I'll win it back later. It's just a temporary loan. And so if you try to defend right that, it's now we're triple attacking. There is no way to defend this knight. Just totally, totally beautiful. Instead of that, we have Hikaru trying to defend this way with his king. Couple moves, he gives a check, and now he's like, yeah, give me this anyway. We have a very similar position, shows up on the board. And now Hikaru's trying to run away. He's like, you know what? I didn't have this very good figured out over on the king side. Maybe I could run my king to the queen side if I could survive this. We know Hikaru is a great, great defender. Let's see what he's able to do. And after a couple trades, he wants to give a queen trade. Right now, miraculously, we have equal material. So if there is a queen trade right here, I have no doubt that Hikaru would be able to figure out a defense. But if you're on the attack, if you have the initiative, if you have more space than your opponent and your king is safer, yeah, don't trade queens. Let's keep pieces on the board. And we activate the rook again with check. And this is the crowning move. I'll give you just a couple seconds to see if you could see Vidit's move right here. It is totally beautiful. It's setting up a discovered check on the queen, and there's just nothing to be done. In this case right here, he tries to create an escape square, and now Vidit sets up a fork with this discovered check, and Hikaru resigns right here. The win goes to Vidit. This first game really just shows how critical piece activity is, particularly piece development and king safety. Bring your pieces out as quickly as you can. Have more pieces out than your opponent. It's going to give you more options. And, try not to move your pawns in front of your king. That's going to lead to a big, big attack by your opponent. This next game features my man Vidit again. He's got the black pieces again, and up against him is Ian Nepomniachtchi, who is the two-time candidates winner. He won it back-to-back, faced different world champions both times, lost to both of them. He's back for the three-peat. Let's see what he's able to do. He plays e4. We're in round 4, by the way, and we have the same thing. We have the Spanish opening, and in this case, Jan offers the Berlin Endgame over to Vidit. The Berlin Endgame, as we're about to see in a second, you give up this pawn, push forward, the knight moves back, it's attacking the bishop. The bishop takes here, and we have a damaged structure. White wins back the pawn, and so now we have an equal material, and now we trade off queens. Black cannot castle, but there are not any queens on the board, so it's okay, right? How are you going to checkmate this black king if you don't have a queen? With all your other pieces, but, your stuff's not developed yet, and this is a well-known position. Let's see what the players have. Jan brings his knight out, bishop, and this g4 move is super, super rare. And this next move right here is a novelty. A novelty, this hasn't been played before at the top levels. And what's the idea here? The idea is to defend g4. G4's already defended by this pawn, so why? Because black, a lot of times in these lines, will play h5 and try to undermine this pawn. And so now having this over defense of the pawn, that's going to be a critical detail. Black here plays g5, and Jan strikes right at f4, going right for Vidit, and develops his bishop. So now we have 1, 2, 3 pieces developed. I'm actually going to give it 4 because this rook is already on an open file. That's a great place for your rook to be. And black here only has 3 pieces developed. So we definitely have a bit of an advantage for Jan with development, and he has a space advantage. And what exactly is a space advantage? So space advantage is when you are in your opponent's half of the board. So this pawn's in the opponent's half of the board, also attacks these two squares, and this bishop's in the opponent's half of the board, also hits, these two, and hits these two squares. So that's, if you want to count basically all the stuff that's in your opponent's half of the board and attacking your opponent's half of the board, this attacks, this attacks, this attacks, this attacks. I don't know, that probably adds up to like 10 or something, versus black only has, what does black have? Black has one attack onto the opponent's half of the board, and it's attacking a pawn that's already defended. So white is winning in development, and he's winning in space. So if you're winning in space and you're winning in development, it means you have better options. And as you'll see here in a minute, black's going to have a really hard time figuring out where to put his pieces. And white continues to ratchet up the pressure. He's going for this f6 square. That's an outpost for the knight. So an outpost is when there's no pawns that attack a square. So it's a weak square, and this pawn is defending it for white. So if you land your piece there, it's going to basically stay there forever until another piece kicks it out, especially when it's your opponent's half of the board. That is a great place to be. Gains you even more space. This knight now attacks all of these squares in black's half of the board. And these next couple moves, white moves here and moves here. We're in an endgame. What is important in an endgame? To activate your king. That's what white is doing right away, naturally. Black tries to strike back over on the queen side. He's locking down white's pawns from extending further with his own pawn movements. We activate our last piece onto the open file. That's the best place for the rooks to be. And we have in a couple of more moves, this pawn move right here is really cool. It restricts all of these knight moves. Jan just putting down the clamps, making it as difficult as possible for Vidit to develop, move over onto this side, try to lock down over on that. And we see Vidit go after this weak b2 pawn. And Jan has to respond to it. He goes back to c1, undeveloping, defending that pawn. And now Vidit is over here. He pins this c3 knight to the king. And let's see what he's able to come up with. We have Jan forcing the issue. He is making black respond, forking the bishop and the rook. Luckily, the bishop's defended. And so we are just trading pieces. And it looks like white's able to gain a pawn in the game here. This captures, and okay, cool. Black's able to recapture that pawn. We're back to material equality, but white has this passed pawn. It's already on the 5th rank, the 5th row right here, and it's got a rook right behind it, so it's going to be able to support these pushes all the way to the goal line. Plus, black now, it's looking a little bit questionable. What is this rook doing over here? It's not able to help with the defense of this pawn, and it's kind of like locked itself in a little bit of a prison. But there are ways. There are ways for black to activate this. Let's see what he's able to do. White moves forward, and black is trying to go here. Because if captures, remember, this pawn is pinned, and so he'd be able to lock himself out of prison, immediately activate this rook, cause all sorts of problems. White continues forward, attacks this knight, and the knight has to move, and now the pawn is only one square away from promotion. Bishop moves back, and you might be thinking, well, why don't you just queen, and now, you'll get a pawn for the bishop. But this pawn all the way on that far side of the board is way more valuable than the bishop. Plus, you got to be careful. This move is coming. Black's going to be able to plow through and be able to, break through, make his own threats over on the queen side if you're not careful. So white continues. He attacks this knight, moves, double attacks the knight, and there's only one move right here for black to save this game. I'll give you a couple seconds to find it. It's really, really an unintuitive move, and we just mentioned how that bishop is potentially not as valuable as the pawn. The knight also is not as valuable as the pawn. What you need to do here is here, captures, grab the pawn, re-get your rook into the game. That would be threatening the bishop, so need to respond to it right away. And play this endgame down a little bit of material. You'll be able to create your own threats, create your own pass pawns over here on the queen side, see what happens. Unfortunately, in the game, Vidit was not able to find that move, and he plays the natural bishop over to e8. You're going, okay, you're going to take my knight? Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll take your knight, I suppose. But the follow-up to it is just brutal. After this capture, it's white's move. The move's pretty natural. It's a dual purpose move. Slides back to c1. You're attacking this bishop. It needs to respond, and you're locking this rook back in prison. The rook can no longer capture on b2 to get itself out of harm's way. Bishop gives a check. The king's moving forward, and this next move, super, super fun, gives up the rook for the bishop, but the idea being once you capture the bishop, there's nothing to stop the queen from coming into the game. Game's over right here. A possible continuation for it is moving the bishop back, trying to break your way out of this prison. And right here, the brutal king to f7, and there's nothing to be done. If the rook captures right here, you might get one check in, move back to e6, and the bishop miraculously is covering e3. Nothing to be done. This one goes to Jan. When it comes to chess strategy, we saw how piece activity ties with king safety and how space can give you a big advantage to really restrict your opponent. That's 3 out of the 5 main chess strategies that you need to know for all levels of play. Obviously, when you're a brand new player, you think about it just a little bit different than when you work your way up the rankings ladder. But subscribe here. I'm going to continue to go over these top level games and explain chess strategy in an approachable, easy to understand way. Have a great night, guys. I'll see you around here soon.